initiated?
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, most people run from battle, but our service members run towards it. They watch their brothers and sisters get wounded. They miss births and funerals, school plays, and college graduations. Then they come home bearing the wounds of war, both visible and otherwise. They will always do their job defending our country, no matter the sacrifice. So they deserve to know that they have the moral support and legal backing of this great nation. But for more than 20 years, Washington has failed to give them that. One of Congress's most solemn duties is deciding when and how we send Americans into combat by debating and passing the authorization for use of military force. Documents that set the legal framework for military action that are supposed to define the mission of our Americans that we send downrange. But lately, too many in these halls have shrugged off that duty, hiding behind outrageously outdated AUMFs that were used to launch the Gulf and Iraq wars all the way back in 1991 and 2002. Scared of the political risks that come with bringing these wars back into the spotlight, staring down upcoming election days, Congress has shirked its responsibility to our troops, skewing the original intent of these documents. And in doing so, we've left our troops without a clearly defined mission. And now, they face an increasing risk that a future commander-in-chief may improperly interpret the law to send them into armed conflicts that these AUMFs were never intended to authorize. Our troops deserve better than that. If we choose to send our finest into battle, then we here in these halls need to debate and vote to do so based on current conditions. Enough of being more worried about political consequences than about our troops in harm's way. And until we muster up the courage to ask and answer the tough questions that will actually tell our service members what they're fighting for, we won't be living up to their sacrifices. Instead, we'll be leaving them in an endless loop, refusing to even look for an off-ramp. Look, I know guys and gals, buddies whom I served with in Iraq, who did 6-7 rotations between Iraq and Afghanistan. They went in knowing that they'd probably be back in a couple of years, living the hardships of combat deployments over and over again, risking the unimaginable sun up and sun down, year in and year out, tour after tour, all because their country said that it needed them to. They deserve more from us than to be forced to wonder whether the same outdated AUMF that has already sent them overseas half a dozen times will be misused once again to put them in harm's way, without members of Congress even having a conversation to decide whether such sacrifice is warranted. This shouldn't be hard. Anyone who claims the mantle of patriotism can't keep demanding such sacrifices from our service members while refusing to step up to our obligation, our responsibility to have a public debate and vote when we ask our troops to go into combat. Are their lives not worth a vote? Not even worth a discussion? To me, part of the problem lies in the growing disconnect between those who serve and those who overseas and those who serve on the Hill. Right now in Washington, we just don't have as many members of Congress with combat experience the way we did in the years after Vietnam. The era when those returning from war would put down their rucks, hang up their uniforms, and head to the Capitol building to serve their country in a different kind of way. The era when John McCain and John Kerry would reach across the aisle to solve some of our nation's biggest problems because both of them were more concerned with doing right by the troops who protected us than brandishing partisan labels. But now, far fewer veterans come to Washington, and the divide has sharpened, with those sitting in hallowed houses of power ever more removed from those sent off to battle. Well, I can tell you this. It's a whole lot easier to cover your eyes and avoid taking tough votes if you've never shed blood in the dust and grit and horror of a war zone. If you've never held your family close before heading off on yet another tour, kissing your loved ones for what you know could be the last time. But today, there are just a handful of us in the Senate who've been in combat. The same is true for our country at large, as the same families keep volunteering to serve generation after generation. In Vietnam, because of the draft, a boy from rural Missouri could have ended up in a fighting position next to someone from the upper echelons of New York society. Of course, the rich could get out of service then too. Our former president's bone spurs proved that. But in that bygone era, service touched nearly every corner of this country, regardless of tax bracket or race or education. Now it falls onto the shoulders of the same families to volunteer time and again, or it gets foisted upon those who've fallen on hard times, service as a mean of escaping poverty. So the gap widens, with the vast majority of Americans never having served and having little idea what it's like, other than what they see from Hollywood. And so the disconnect yawns, with it becoming even easier for most of us to live our lives blissfully detached from the nightmarish reality of war. We have to do more to bridge this divide. True patriotism isn't measured by how long of a standing ovation one gives our military on a single day in November each and every year. Real, lasting, meaningful patriotism requires doing the hard work necessary to actually change our country, to make it a better, fairer place where sacrifices aren't borne by just a few, but instead carried by all. Our troops are willing to sacrifice anything, everything, for their country. They fought for us time after time, tour after tour after tour. It's time that we fight for them too. It's time that we repeal these decades-old AUMFs and start honoring our heroes in the way that they deserve, showing just an ounce of the courage that they show over and over again. God bless our troops in harm's way. God bless our veterans. And always, God bless the United States of America. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.